Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our Soil Sessions webinar this morning about transitioning to no-till. As Stacy said, my name is Maddy Rabenhorst. I work in South Dakota and North Dakota as the Field Manager for the Soil Health Partnership. Um, Before we get started here today into the webinar, I just wanted to give you a brief background about myself. So I grew up on a grain and livestock farm by Webster, South Dakota, which is in the northeast part of the state. I attended South Dakota State University and graduated with a degree in agronomy. Shortly after college, I started working for a local co-op as a sales agronomist and actually was in a precision ag role for a little bit before coming to the Soil Health Partnership. Currently pursuing my master's in agronomy at Iowa State University. And right now I live and farm with my husband by Salem, South Dakota, which is in the southeast part of the state. We have two dogs, as you can see. I had to put a picture of them on there. We have a Great Dane in the bottom left-hand corner. Her name's Bristol, and a Springer Spaniel named Jackson. So my husband and I operate a 1,300-acre crop farm, primarily corn and soybeans right now. And we are starting to transition to using soil health practices and diversifying our operation. So later in the webinar, I'm actually going to dive into our personal soil health journey and kind of share with you some of the challenges and benefits we've been seeing to soil health practices and how we are transitioning to no-till. So today we're talking about transitioning to no-till, and so I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what you can expect from this webinar. So first, we're going to start off by talking about, what is no-till and defining no-till. Then we're going to kind of go into some of the benefits of no-till and why, as a producer, you would maybe want to consider using no-till on your farm. We're then going to talk about the transition process and how that process looks different for everyone, and maybe some of the tools and some of the practices you can use during that transition process, and some of the key things you need to consider as you transition to a no-till system. Then I'll dive into my personal soil health experience and kind of provide some background on where our farm is, where we're hoping to go in the future with soil health, and then how we're going to transition to no-till. And then lastly, I just want to touch on, once you get into a no-till system and you've made that transition, how can you know if your no-till system is working? How can you actually assess and assess the no-till system and make sure it's working for you? So first, we'll just talk about what is no-till. So on this slide here, you'll see a definition of no-till. This is a definition that I kind of came up with in my own words. There's a lot of definition of no-till out there. NRCS and other soil health organizations have their definition. This is the definition that I've come up with. So I define no-till as the practice of planting and growing crops, as well as controlling weeds without the use of tillage. It strives to keep the soil covered with maximum residue and to not disturb the soil outside of planting. And on this slide here, you can see this picture of a no-till cornfield. This is actually a picture from one of my SHP plots this spring, where we're comparing no-till versus conventional till. And I thought it was a really great picture of some beautiful no-till corn that was no-till into some soybean and rye residue from the previous year. Okay, so next we're just going to dive into, as a producer, why no-till? What are some of the benefits that we can see from no-till? So on this slide, I've broken down the benefits into kind of two separate categories: soil health benefits, and then some other benefits that include some other environmental benefits, along with more benefits that are direct to the producer. So we'll go through the soil health benefits first. A lot of people know that one of the biggest benefits that we can see from no-till is the increase in organic matter over time. So in a conventional till system, when we're tilling the soil every single year, we know by exposing that soil to the environment, we are losing organic matter over time and are depleting our soils. So by no-tilling and keeping that system undisturbed and keeping that residue on the soil, we can start to increase organic matter. It does take quite a few number of years to see those increases in organic matter, and there is some debate about how fast we can build organic matter, but we definitely know that if we keep that system whole and keep the soil covered, we can start to see some increases in organic matter over time. with increases in organic matter also comes some soil structure. So so no-till helps us build soil structure. And again, by keeping that soil covered and not disturbing it, we're able to build the soil structure, which helps us increase things such as water holding capacity and water infiltration. I think those are one of the most important soil health benefits you can see from no-till. And water holding capacity is the ability of your soil to hold water. So if we can increase our ability to hold water in our soils, we can hold more water for longer periods of time. And that can definitely help in certain situations. Um, we also can increase our water infiltration with no-till systems. And so when we have extreme rain events or heavy rain events, we're able to actually capture that water and let it infiltrate into the soil rather than it running off. Um, No-till also, since we're keeping that soil undisturbed, we're keeping the residue on the soil, we're allowing that soil to function as the living system that it is. So when you walk out into a no-till field, especially one that's been in a no-till system for quite a while, it's really easy to start seeing worms and wormholes visually when you walk onto the field. So no-till does help increase your worm counts because with tillage, we constantly every year destroy the habitat of those worms and the other living organisms in the soil. So no-till allows those worms and other organisms to thrive. And on this picture here on this slide, you actually can see I'm holding an earthworm midden in my hand, which is just kind of the residue that the earthworms gather above their hole. And when you remove those middens from the surface, you actually can see their burrows that go down into the soil profile. Some other benefits of no-till that we see that are environmental would be reducing erosion. So again, we're not disturbing that soil and we're keeping it protected with maximum residue, which helps us eliminate and reduce the impacts of wind and water erosion. It also helps us improve water quality. So as the residue helps kind of filter any sort of water that's leaving the field. So we aren't actually losing soil with the water. It's mainly just clean water that leaves the field. Some other benefits that I feel that are really important to producers is it helps increase your farm resiliency against extreme weather events. So as I described before, with water holding capacity and the ability to infiltrate more water, we can have better resiliency against extreme weather events like droughts and floods. And that is something that I think is really important, especially these past couple of years that we've been seeing extreme weather events. If we can have soils that can hold on to more water during droughts and can infiltrate more water during floods, that's really beneficial. No-till also helps reduce fuel costs, so you're not having to pull the tillage implement across the field multiple times a year. So that it does reduce fuel costs, and it also saves money on time and labor. So again, you're not making those extra trips across the field. The next couple of slides that I just want to talk about are just some pictures of some conventional versus no-till systems that I want to just walk through with you. So this slide right here is actually a picture of what we call a slump test. And so what we do is we take soil from different management systems, we submerge the soil in water, and then we slap it onto a piece of cardboard or wood or any sort of hard surface you have laying around. And then we tilt the cardboard up and the reason we tilt it up is to see how stable that soil is. And so as you can see here on the conventional tilled soil, as we tilted the cardboard up, it started to slide down. And that is due to the lack of soil structure that we have in that system. You can actually see the soil's it kind of looks like pudding. Oh, excuse me. It looks like pudding right here. It's kind of starting to muddle away and just there's really no structure there. Here in the middle, we have a no-till system, and you can see that when we tilted the cardboard, it really didn't move at all. It has really good soil structure. You can see some really good pores and aggregate formation in that soil, and this soil looks more like chocolate cake instead of pudding. So it's holding itself together really well. And then on the far right was a soil with no-till plus the addition of cover crops. And again, that was very similar to the no-till soil. This slide is just a comparison of some different soil aggregates between a no-till system and a conventional till system. So on the left-hand side, you have a no-till aggregate. As you can see, there is some really good pore space within this aggregate, and you just have overall good aggregate formation and just really good structure. Um, you can see there was some roots and living roots in this aggregate as well. And even the soil that's falling off down here, it's actually still small aggregates that are falling off, and it's not just flaking off in dust-like particles. They're actually small aggregates. So this no-till aggregate, it's a really good overall good structure. On the right-hand side, we have conventional tilled, an aggregate from a conventional tilled system. And as you can see, the structure and the whole shape of this aggregate is much different than the no-till aggregate. This one is more platey-like. You can see the presence of compaction layers in the aggregate from tillage. There's really minimal pore space. You don't have the big open pores like you do in this no-till aggregate. So overall, there's just poorer structure with the conventional tilled aggregate. But I thought that'd be a good visual for those of you that haven't had a chance to see the difference between aggregates in these two systems. This last picture is just some pictures from a rainfall simulator, a tabletop rainfall simulator from one of our field days. And they're the same picture, but I want you to look first at the runoff on this picture on the left-hand side. So down here on the left-hand, we have no-till, right, we have conventional till, and these buckets represent the amount of runoff that we have between the two systems. So as you can see, there's a lot less runoff between a no-till system versus a conventional till system. But I also want you to look at the water quality differences. In no-till, it's very clear. You can pretty much see the table through the bottom of the container, while the conventional tilled system is very murky. That's probably something you wouldn't really want to drink. It definitely just has soil particles that are running off with the water, while the no-till system is filtering out any particles, and it's pretty clear water that's running off the field. On the right-hand side, we have the same picture, but now I want you to focus on the top two containers, which are the infiltration. And so again, we have no-till on the left, conventional till on the right. The no-till infiltration is a lot higher than the conventional till. There's hardly any infiltration in the conventional till bucket. There's a little water around a soil clod that fell through, but the no-till system has some really good infiltration happening, and it's actually taking in that soil. So now we can kind of go through the transition process of no-till. And something that I just really want to make clear today is that this transition process, it's going to look different for every farm, and that is completely okay. I think sometimes we hear that, if you're not doing 100% no-till, you can't really classify yourself as a no-tiller, or sometimes there's a stigma around no-till that you have to be 100% in order for it to work. And I just think that there is a transition process to transitioning to no-till, and it can't happen overnight for every farm. So it's going to look different for every farm, and that's completely okay. So I just put on here, maybe it's trying a few acres or one field on your farm one year, starting off really slow, which is something that I do recommend producers to do. It might be something where you're not going to go 100% to no-till, but maybe you're going to try a different tillage practice than what you're used to. I think sometimes we forget even having producers go from conventional till to a conservation tillage practice is a huge step in the right direction. And then I just put, maybe it is diving in and switching 100% to no-till next year. There are some producers I know who have done it and it's worked for them, and I think that is great. But I also think we have to understand that that's not going to be the best route for every farm. So these are some of the key things that I want you to consider as you start to think about transitioning to no-till. So again, I think one of the most important things to consider is, starting slow. No-till is a new management practice, and it's going to be a new system that you have to learn how to manage. So starting slow with a few acres or a small field on your farm is going to help you. It's going to help you learn and understand about this new management system. Another suggestion I have is maybe trying no-till soybeans first. Soybeans seem to be a little bit more defensive under no-till. under a no-till environment, and seed placement isn't as crucial with soybeans as it is corn. And so sometimes no-till soybeans are a better route for producers to start with. Then third on this slide is try strip tilling. So I know we're talking about no-till today and the transition process, but I do think that using other tillage practices might be an option through that transition process. And for our farm, as you'll see later in the webinar, we are going to start incorporating strip till on some of our acres. So, and strip tilling can be a really good option for corn acres. So I wanted to walk through strip tilling a little bit just to kind of go over it as a stepping stone in the transition process. So again, no-till, switching 100% isn't always practical for producers. And so other tillage practices, conservation tillage practices can be used, such as strip till. And strip till does help build soil structure. It keeps a good majority of the residue on the soil surface. And what I really like about strip till is it allows a producer to plant into a seed bed that they're used to. So in a conventional till system, we're really used to planting into pretty much a completely bare, pretty black seed bed. Now strip till, as you can see in this picture, it allows you to still make those tillage strips and let you plant into those, and you're used to that, but it keeps a large majority of residue in between those rows. This is just a picture of a rainfall simulator from a strip till field day that I attended this summer, and so I just thought it was really interesting to see the differences between conventional till and strip till, and I think it proves that strip till can provide soil health benefits too. So as you can see here on the right-hand side, the top row here is infiltration, bottom row is runoff. And so on the far right-hand side is a conventional till field. So you can see we have very little infiltration. We're getting quite a bit of runoff that is quite murky and dirty. And then the next set of containers is 4 years of strip till. So the infiltration, I think it's really interesting to see the large differences in infiltration between conventional till and 4 years of strip till. We're starting to actually gain some infiltration. We're having a little bit of runoff, but it's very clear. And then the third set of containers is a 12-year strip till no-till, so strip till corn, no-till soybeans, with the addition of cover crops. And we even have larger amounts of infiltration happening, still a little runoff, but not too bad, and it's pretty clear. So I think it's important to point out that strip till can provide some soil health benefits and can be a great stepping stone during the transition process. And like I said, it's going to be something we incorporate on our farm, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. I briefly wanted to touch on just kind of the strip till options that are out there. There are a lot of different machines and different companies who produce strip till machines, but in the top here, you have kind of your traditional strip till machine that most everyone's used to seeing in the field. So the traditional strip till machine, it creates the tillage strip, and then at the same time, fertilizer is usually applied within that strip. And so you can see here, there's a fertilizer bin on this strip tiller. These machines are fairly expensive to purchase, so it can be quite an investment for a farm to switch to a traditional strip till machine. And so this is where a strip freshener comes into play. So strip freshener here on the bottom, it creates a tillage strip just like a traditional strip till machine, but it doesn't usually incorporate fertilizer right away. But these implements can be plumbed to incorporate fertilizer if that's something the producer would like to do. The one nice thing about strip fresheners is that they're more economically friendly to get into and to purchase. They're substantially less costly than a traditional strip till machine. And we are actually on our farm are going to hopefully purchase a strip freshener this winter. And this is how we are going to create our strip till on our corn acres. So some more things that I would like producers to consider as they switch to no-till and transition to no-till is we do have to evaluate our crop inputs. So when we transition to no-till, it is, again, a completely different management system. And so we're going to want to make sure that we are putting the right crop inputs out there. So it's possible when you are selecting your seed for no-till environments that you may want to plant hybrids with better vigor or emergence scores. I see this especially under no-till corn conditions. Some no-till corn, or some corn hybrids, excuse me, have better vigor or emergence scores, and so they perform better under no-till environments. So that may be something you want to look at as you consider transitioning. Fertilizer is another crop input that just needs to make sure to be evaluated. It's possible that you may want to switch up the source of your fertilizer and the way that you're applying it. So traditionally, fertilizer is broadcast and incorporated with tillage. In a no-till system, that fertilizer has to get worked in with moisture, and it takes maybe a little bit longer for that fertilizer to get into the ground. So I know some producers that put starter fertilizer on their planter just to make sure they have the nutrients there right with the seed. And then lastly, herbicides. I think herbicides are one of the most important crop inputs that you need to evaluate through this process, because your herbicide program will most likely change. So in a traditional conventional tilled system, we are using tillage primarily as a source of weed control. In a no-till system, we no longer can use that tillage to control weeds, so we're relying 100% on herbicides for our weed control. And so more than likely, you're going to have to incorporate the use of burn down herbicides with your pre-emergent herbicide. And so it's going to, your herbicide program will change a bit, and it's going to look a little bit different. And also some of the weed species that you have to target out in your no-till fields might change. So in a no-till system, we're not disturbing the soil, we're not working the ground in the fall or the spring or at any time. And so some weed species, especially winter annuals like mare's tail, become more prevalent. In South Dakota, we have some big issues with mare's tail because in the fall, in a conventional tilled system, those fields are worked, and so the small rosettes of mare's tail that are growing in the fall are usually destroyed with the tillage, while in a no-till situation, those rosettes can actually overwinter, and then they'll start growing rapidly once the temperatures warm up in the spring. So we have to make sure that we are applying the proper burn down herbicides to kill off those kinds of weeds, and we need to make sure that we're spraying them early so we're having effective control. Some other things that we need to consider once you decide to transition to no-till and you're starting to establish this new system, it's really important to communicate those changes to your retailers and making sure that you're telling your agronomists about these changes, because it is going to be a new management system, and I think it's really important that everyone's on the same page. The next thing that we'll want you to consider is evaluating your equipment. So, and this is primarily your planter. So again, a no-till system, it's a completely different management system than conventional tilled, and so your planter may have to be modified in order to plant into a no-till system. Some planters, they can plant sometimes both in conventional and no-till systems, but a lot of times producers like to modify their planters for no-till systems, especially things such as row cleaners and closing wheels. Sometimes you have to purchase different planter parts just to make sure that you're getting a really good, like you're getting your seed trench closed, you're getting that residue moved with your row cleaners, and you're having a successful crop establishment. The next thing I want you to consider is changing your mindset, and this is probably one of the biggest things that I think it takes in order to make no-till a success, is we need to make sure that we're changing our mindset. Again, it's a new system. I've probably said that about 20 times already, but it's a new system, and with it, it's going to come new challenges. So making sure that we're changing our mindset, that we know that, and having a goal that no-till is our goal, it's going to help you in the long run to make sure that that no-till system is successful. And then last, I just want to make sure and stress the importance of developing a really good plan. So taking that time in the winter months to put a good plan together to make sure that you're successful with no-till in the springtime is going to be really important. So now I'll dive into our personal soil health journey a little bit and kind of the reasons why we're switching to soil health practices on our farm. So these two pictures on this slide are pictures from our fields this spring. And as you can see, we have very poor soil structure. Um, we finally have come to realize that our soil is just not where it needs to be, and that we need to start improving the structure, improving the soil health of it. So again, we have no soil structure. We have very poor drainage. We farm in a very flat area of South Dakota, and for us right now, tile isn't an option. We rent 100% of the ground that we farm, and tile just really isn't an option for us financially or for our landowners. And so we think with soil health practices, we can help build that soil structure, improve drainage. Um, we are also switching to soil health practices because of the more frequent and extreme weather events we've been having. As everyone knows, 2019 has been a very tough season. On our farm, we only got 240 acres out of 1,300 planted. So we had a lot of prevent plant fields this year. 2018 was also very wet for us. So we actually have some fields in 2018, from the fall of 2018, that still haven't been touched. They have ruts, and we're battling some really tough conditions right now. And then I guess the last reason that we want to start switching to soil health practices is we just feel it's our responsibility to take care of the land. I think all farmers feel that way, and we've just seen that we can start doing more and doing a better job. And I apologize for the busyness of the slide, but I just wanted to show you guys how we're going to get there and how we think our personal soil health journey is going to happen. And so this past winter, my husband and I sat down and we mapped out our farm goals anywhere from 1 to 2 years all the way up to 100 years. And I'm not saying you guys, a farmer has to do this at all, but I do encourage at least writing down short-term goals, 1 to 2, 3, maybe 5-year goals. I think it helps keep producers on track, make sure that they understand where they want their farm to go. And so even as we face challenges, we still know our end goal. We may have to change and change our process, but we still know that we have a goal in the long run. So for our farm, our first kind of goals over the next 1 to 2 years is we want to shift to 100% no-till beans and then start experimenting with some cover crops. By year 3, our goal is to have strip till on all of our corn acres and continue to increase our cover crop use. So these goals have actually already changed a little bit because I believe we will be purchasing a strip freshener this winter, and hopefully we'll be able to strip till next year. So goals can change. It's just good to have them written down. And then as you can see, year 5, we want to start shifting some of our corn acres to no-till, start experimenting, with more corn no-till acres. And then by year 10, this is where we want to be 100% no-till on all of our acres. Some people might think, why do you have a 10-year goal of no-till? Why isn't it 3, 5 years? We just feel that 10 years is really realistic for our farm right now and where we're at as producers. So if we get there sooner, I think that's great. If it takes us a few more years after 10 years, I think that's okay. But we have a goal written down, and it's something that we're constantly looking at. And then the 30, 50, and 100-year goals, they're a little bit more, if you read some of them, you might think I'm maybe a little crazy, but we think once we get a soil health system established and it's really healthy, we can maybe start cutting back on fertilizer and having more of a resilient system built. So I'll just kind of briefly go over our personal plans for next year. So in a perfect world, I would love to no-till all of our soybeans and strip till with a strip freshener all of our corn acres. I'm already starting to see that those goals might not be realistic for us next year. We have a lot of prevent plant ground to manage still as I said, from this year, and even fields from the fall of 2018. We have a lot of ruts in some fields from 2018 that we honestly haven't been able to get out there yet because it's been so wet. And so we know that going into spring next year, some of our prevent plant fields, they might have to be fully tilled. We actually might have to do some heavier tillage than we're used to on some of those fields, but that's something that we are fine, we're okay with, and we know that in order to be successful at no-till and these other practices, it may just mean that we have to start over and kind of start fresh on some of our fields, and maybe some of those fields won't get no-till or strip-till until 2021. But we have a plan put in place, but we're going to have to kind of see how the weather is come springtime. But that prevent plant ground is something that we're going to have to manage, and we want to set ourselves up for success. So this last part here is what I wanted to go over. Say you get through that transition process, you get a no-till system established. I just wanted to kind of go over what you can start looking at and how you can evaluate to see if your no-till system's working for you. So I think it's really important to use our senses and to actually get on the field and use our senses. So use sight, touch, and smell to evaluate our no-till systems and even our conventional tilled systems, but just to see if that no-till system is really working for you. So with sight, visually assessing the field and evaluating things like stand counts and seedling health, we want to make sure that in a no-till system, you're not seeing large differences in stand counts versus those stand counts that you're used to in a conventional tilled system. We want to make sure we're getting really good crop establishment, that our seedlings look healthy. As I discussed before, when you walk out into a no-tilled system that's been no-tilled for a few years, you're going to be able to actually start to see the worms. You're not going to have to dig for them as you would in a conventional tilled system. You're actually going to be able to see the worms on the wormholes on the soil surface, and then you'll be able to just move the soil and start seeing the presence of worms. So I think that's a really neat visual that you can go out and see in a no-till field. And then yield is also something that we can start looking at. So I think it's just really important to say that we want to make sure we're not seeing large differences in yield versus in a no-tilled system versus conventional tilled system. It's possible that you're going to see a few bushels swing, positive or negative, but we just want to make sure that we're not seeing large differences in yield between these two systems and that the no-till system is working for us. Using touch and actually getting out in the field and feeling the difference in the soil. So if you can remember the aggregate slide that I showed you, those aggregates not only look different, but they feel different. So a soil in a no-till system, it's going to feel more granular, it's going to fall apart really nice, it's going to have more structure, and it's really just going to feel like a good soil to plant into. Soil from a conventional tilled field can sometimes feel very chunky and blocky. It has a different feel to it, and you can really see the presence of compaction layers. And lastly, I just wanted to say to smell the soil. The difference in the smell between no-till soil and conventional tilled soil is very big. The soil smells alive in a no-till system. Since we're keeping that system undisturbed and covered with residue and letting it act as a living organism that it is, the soil just smells fresh and it smells alive. Sometimes conventional tilled soil hardly smells like anything, and so you really can smell the difference between the two systems. And I believe this is one of my last slides of the presentation. So I just wanted to touch on and mention that the soil is a dynamic system. And so no-till is one management practice, is one soil health practice that we can incorporate on our farm. But cover crops are another important management practice. So no-till is a great first start, but we have to also remember that no-tilling for 30, 40, 50 years might not be the best for our soil either. So we have to make sure that we're incorporating multiple management practices, and they ultimately should be used together. But I also want to stress the importance of starting with one practice and really getting to know that practice well and making it a success before incorporating another one. So I think it's really important, if your goal on your farm is to focus on no-till, let's focus our efforts on no-till, get a really good no-till system established, and then we can start introducing cover crops. If we combine and start adding too many management practices together at the same time, sometimes that can lead to even more challenges and sometimes even more setbacks. So really just making sure that we're focusing on one management practice at a time, but ultimately in the long term, we should be using them together. So just to wrap up here, it's just my conclusion slide. So today we've kind of discussed that no-till provides many soil health, financial and environmental benefits. I've stressed the importance that the transition process looks really different for everyone, and that's completely okay. It's going to look different for every farm. And if there's three things that I would like you to remember from this webinar, it would be to, if you're thinking about transitioning into no-till or in that process right now, just remember to start slow, to change your mindset, and to develop a good plan.